Hello, following on from my earlier video of today, I'm today talking a bit more about something that I've been discussing a lot in various videos in the past couple of months on my new YouTube channel, my diagnosis of schizophrenia and psychosis, and I've talked a bit about some of the root causes that are hardly a mystery to a decent and experienced, educated psychiatrist, but it's been ignored for me all my life, this issue. And I've discussed how sexually abused as a child, sexually abused in the office, treated like the underdog in my profession as a business journalist, and then a very unhelpful stigmatising of me once I'd had schizophrenia diagnosed, and also later epilepsy, and they were no kinder to me about the epilepsy than were schizophrenia. But they even medical professionals recently are trying to dismiss it as moods and failing to address the issue. Luckily I'm seizure free now, but they're trying to misprescribe, for example, the drug Keppra for a mood stabiliser, and it's extremely dangerous and harmful for a fetus. And much as I'd like a child in the current climate, even though my seizures are better, and this was an issue for me before trying to consider a child, even if I met the right person, I'd probably have to continue to abstain, because quite frankly it is not anything. I can guarantee now that they won't jab me with something harmful, not only for my epilepsy but to my unborn child. It was my understanding I had epilepsy, that I wasn't able to take antibiotics because of the risk of seizures or incompatibility of my medications. That meant, or an anaesthetic, that meant if I'd had a traumatic injury I'd have to have had surgery without anaesthetic, and the same goes for any complications in childhood. To say I was in pain was an understatement, but luckily I have come over the worst and had some tremendously wonderful religious and spiritual experiences, also dismissed as hyper-religiosity by medical professions who think that's one of my symptoms of psychosis. I'm a Christian, and I've found a lot of love in life on here, on heaven on earth, and I believe also I love science, even though I haven't really been a professional scientist to say the least. I like the idea of the physics concept of lock universe. I like to think that all our ancestors still out there alive, pottering around with no such different frustrations about a type of bigot in their society also. Anyway, today, instead of I've been talking a lot about the socio-economic problems and mental health stigma in Britain, and also my speciality subject, which is Russian natural gas politics. And I've been discussing this in some lengthy videos, and also the housing crisis is in all of them, because it can't be ignored. And this is my council flat. I've been working from here, and I've decided today to continue a discussion of what psychosis was for me, at least the diagnosis. I've discussed how it was triggered quite suddenly. I had acute psychosis and then diagnosed with schizophrenia. I suddenly had a ghastly feeling I'd been drugged and raped. And this is in the context of a genuine serious sexual assault I had at 18 by a man, sexual abuse both in the family and at school as a child, the adultification of me as a child, and also hate crimes against me as an adult. But I've said that now these days I can see clearly where I'm on antipsychotic medications, but it was the same even without them. I can see the trains of thought that occurred in this alarming manner when I first became so-called ill. I wouldn't call it that, I'd call it enlightenment. And if you see the light, people often criticise because they're at the end of it. So I have discussed in previous videos how my so-called psychosis presented what kind of thoughts I had, and the way in which this mentally confused state of mind is characterised, or was characterised in my case, by by getting your internal wires crossed. I got my internal wires crossed, and this was what happened to me. I've said that as more and more light was shed upon my train of thinking, the more and more I understood where these flashbacks and gory images were coming from. Freudian metaphors are present, and for a non-psychotic person, psychoanalysis can help one understand this. I've discussed I had psychoanalysis in my early 20s before becoming psychotic in my late 20s, and it wasn't anything that was damaging or would do that to me. It was very good, but I understand that certainly people with schizophrenia aren't supposed to have psychoanalysis, but it is the similar principle. It helps you to understand these metaphors, and I suppose once you're psychotic, you're already seeing the metaphors, even if extrapolating them from confusion and reality is a challenge, but doable. It's possible to see what hurt you, why and when. One thing I do know about many people with psychosis or schizophrenia, I'm pretty sure one thing running through it is they feel hurt and frightened, but they may not necessarily be blaming anyone. They can be very sort of reluctant to criticise others because they feel very hurt when they criticise themselves, and that's the case for me. I don't like criticising others, but now I'm not really wanting criticism, I'm damning them. For me, these were worked out over time. So I'll give you a few examples. There are hundreds of them even. First, one of my confabulatory rape flashbacks showed a skinny male, a transvestite skinny male, very skinny and bony, assaulting me wearing women's knickers. He was wearing women's knickers. This, now I see, looks exactly like an adult family friend who sexually abused me at 14, which I've discussed in other videos, in my traumatic events video. At the same time, the girlfriend of this individual, this man, said at the time, in a way that was adultifying me, and it was a kind of conversation I had to endure quite a lot as I was growing up, that this man enjoyed wearing women's underwear, and she laughed off my sexual abuse. And in other words, one of the rapists in this confabulatory state, I was an adult, not a child, but you start to understand sexuality as an adult and not a child. And I then turned myself into an adult, seeing this individual exactly the same, wearing women's underwear. Although I didn't see women's underwear when I was sexually abused by him. So second, related to the above, I was terrified when I first became psychotic, literally driven mad by the idea that I had been given AIDS as a punishment. Not only does this relate to what I've discussed in early videos, my sexual abuse at 13, nearly 14, by men at a party who had HIV, who a family member said had HIV, and a very indifferent family not caring that I might have contracted it. It also related to the many reports of how giving someone the AIDS virus is a punishment, supposedly in the Russian Federation. And I just mixed up one attack with another. Remember, I'm a specialist in Russian politics. Although I didn't really see Russia as the enemy, I thought very differently. I thought it wasn't really the enemy, but some parts that I was frightened of, not others. Third, despite being quite an old-fashioned condition, I was terrified also. I had syphilis. This, I think, related, oddly enough, but you have to be me, you have to understand your own mind, to a documentary about the gangster Al Capone, who was supposed to have contracted it from a woman at one point. And I think this was because some of my male work colleagues in journalism not only came across, in at least one case, as highly unstable, sort of screaming and kicking walls, by all accounts, but also they kept going on about their infertility. A couple of the men sort of wretched with their infertility, and sort of, even though they had a wife, a long-suffering wife. And these symptoms, the instability, mental instability, and infertility were both symptoms of the 3D. And I think I was trying to come to terms with the fact that they just didn't want me in the office and felt sexually abusing me and then accusing me of being a flirt would be a very good way of putting me down and putting me out of journalism. Fourth, I had a vision of a black and white cat having a pin stuck into its ears. You must remember I had to learn about the Russian Revolution and the destiny of Trotsky, who had died that way in a torture situation. And I saw a cruel blonde man sticking a pin into this poor cat's ear. It's a kind of hideous vision, leaving me terrified and upset. This cat looked like a cat of my childhood, a black and white cat I had as a child, many cats in my world, and I discussed how I didn't have much care in my upbringing, but I did have lots of cats who sort of gave me emotional nurture and helped me with self-control and reciprocal kindness. particularly my cat Nightshade, who I remember in my life at the age of 4 upwards. Anyway, this cat wasn't Nightshade. Nightshade was black cat, and this is a black and white cat. But anyway, this later on sounds like some kind of Jungian dream. I refer to the analyst, the analytical psychologist Jung, Gustav Jung, because later on, many years later, I saw a relative finish off her dying cat with some migraine tablets, and as the dying cat felt the impact of the human pills, he bulged out his eyes, and it was exactly the same vision I'd had when I was psychotic. Whatever way you look at it, predicted or otherwise, it is clearly a horrible idea of how a certain type of sex offender will also be cruel to animals, which I understand is a fairly established statistic. And I was getting wind of my sexual abuse and maybe the harm that animals had come to in my childhood. I take it very badly when animals are hurt, and always have. Many of us do. Anyway, it looked exactly the same way as this poor cat, and I realised that one only recently. I think I've got one more example. Yes, I have to say there was also something about this sexual abuse as a child of the individual who purportedly wore women's underwear. And it's horrible to have to say, because I don't want to ever say people in a similar position would ever be unkind or behave in a horrible sexual manner or sexually abuse children. It's just one of those unkind things where one gets tarnished with the same brush. I just want to make that absolutely clear. It was just an unfortunate part, as much the problem with heterosexual people at the party as the homosexual people, but it just happened to be what happened to me. And the problem with this underwear situation is it links also around that time I was screamed at by a female adult relative about how her knickers had gone missing. And these knickers, this was around the time of this man in the house sexually abusing me. And I muddled up this woman sexually abusing me with this man sexually abusing me, who was somehow mysteriously in my mother's knickers. So I've muddled up a kind of maternal anxiety with the man in question, and it's sort of, when you talk about an adult female's knickers, it conjures up your mother's knickers. So I sort of merged a kind of fear about female sexual abuse with this man. Anyway, that's all. I've got many more examples, and none of them are very fun. Yes, so I wrote it here. I'll read it. Just see. Yes, and another example. Yes, you can see how much I block it out and just doze off when I think about these traumatic experiences. You can be quite normal reading things, but I literally can't see for this trauma. Yes, this female relative who was screaming about her missing knickers also plied me with beta blockers when I was an adult that she had been prescribed, saying they were for anxiety, when in fact they are heart medications, and I read later on that they can cause symptoms like hearing voices. I took the number she said I could take, and I started to get agonising heart pains, but didn't know what it was until I came off them in some kind of state of pain. And this may explain why I felt I'd been poisoned when I was psychotic. I had terrible heart fear. I was terrified of heart attack and pills that would give me a heart attack, and I was screaming for help during this period because I was saying, help, help, my heart, whereas in fact it may also have been a situation with undiagnosed seizure symptoms, which can cause terrible fear. And there was also the misuse of antibiotics and the misprescribing of drugs by a doctor in the family, and they were given to the cats in some kind of ghastly manner. So all in all, not only was I being subjected to the misprescription of drugs by people who had no right to really say that was normal, but also the poor cats were probably being plied with drugs. I know about the antibiotics because I was the one who had to give it to them as a child. And this is clearly a terrible idea. You're getting wind of why would they want to hurt me? And I was very frightened for the babies connected to the family at that time who were coming into being. And I realised that the fact that some young relatives were coming into being at that point, I had to urgently address this issue and to consider a similar harm coming their way, especially how ill I became and with the seizures, which I said my neurologist said can be triggered by rape. Anyway, it's very interesting for me to settle down when I understand where these ideas came from. They can rage in your head and be very powerful. But clearly, psychiatry adds insult to injury in the ways I've described in previous videos. And I've got many more examples. I'll talk further about psychosis. Obviously, it's a long journey in psychosis, if that's what you want to call it. But please bear in mind that seizures can also cause psychotic episodes. And the British psychiatric profession and many other types of doctors simply refuse to look at co-occurring conditions. That's it. You're over because you've got a mental health condition, and you're not over with any medical condition. You're still there. You're still yourself. You just might be very troubled for one reason or other, in the way I was. I was extremely troubled, and I'm not any longer because I've overcome, and I'm a mere mortal, but I do believe in heaven on earth, and you make the most of it when you're there. And it's easy to say that when you feel bad, and I can say if I was still having seizures, I don't know what I'd do, but do what I did as I started to stop, which is turn to Christ. And no one should bully you out of your spiritual experience. It's a terrifying experience, but they're still valid thoughts, and they have no right to know them or understand them better than you do yourself. Thank you for listening. I hope this is enlightening and interesting. Thank you.